Good morning and welcome to the Leadership and Insurance Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Bond, and I'm very lucky today to be joined by Phil, who is, Chairman of BriteCore and CEO of DevStride. And we'll flip between asking questions about both just to make it complex. But Phil, how are you doing?
Doing very well. Thank you so much for having me on.
Good. And no one else at home will know this, but I have to thank Phil for his patience because we've been having some really interesting technical difficulties, i.e. I keep disappearing again on camera like some sort of bad 80s sci-fi special effects. But here we are. We're rocking and rolling, so we're good.
Yeah, it's been a fantastic opportunity to have witty banter back and forth. So,
Witty banter, that is in my repertoire, I'd like to think. So look, Phil, before we get going, I'm sure most people out there listening certainly know who BriteCore are, but be great if you could introduce yourself and particularly the two hats that you're wearing currently.
Yeah, absolutely. So many years ago, I've co-founded BriteCore, and which originally began as a company called Intuitive Web Solutions, doing quoting systems for agent portals. And we did that for several years, and a group of our customers came to us and asked us if we wanted to replace their core admin systems. And so BriteCore was born back in about 2009. We started writing code for that, wrote for a couple of years. 2011 launched the product. And I was the CEO of that company for 16 years. I ran that IWS and then BriteCore. Grew the company quite a bit. We went from an early seed round there in 2011 all the way through a Series A and then through a Series B with Warburg Pincus in 2019. I stayed on for about 18 months after that and led the company, and eventually realized that my role is probably best as the founder creator type and less as the operational manager in the scaling organization.
Mm-hmm.
And so departed BriteCore, thought I'd stay retired for a long time, but it turns out if it's in your blood to be a founder, like 2 months on a beach is enough. You 16 years of work, you need about 2 months to reset, and then you're bored out of your mind and you need to do something else. And so have gone in with a group of founders now to launch DevStride, which is doing project and portfolio management for agile teams to try to address some of the challenges that we experienced while we were implementing these big complex software projects at BriteCore. And so have about 20 years in enterprise SaaS and 16 years in InsurTech, and have given a lot of speeches and done a lot and seen a lot, and absolutely am delighted to be here visiting today.
Amazing. So much to pick up there, and we just want to scratch the surface of it. But you and I have obviously spoken before prior to this, and I thought what was particularly valuable is most of the time we're talking to people here on the podcast about the kind of earlier stage of their career or early stage of their entrepreneurial journey, and what we're looking for probably is to sort of unpick some of that knowledge of what's it like to exit, how do you know this about yourself. So when did you realize that it was the right time to step away from that CEO role? Was it something you realized, or was it something that was kind of, was it a group decision? Talk to me about that, because I think knowing when the time's right is such a crucial skill. Get out of your own way for your own happiness, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I would say it was more of a joint decision between the board and myself through a series of conversations. Mm-hmm. But in reflecting, I think I knew for a couple of years before I actually exited that my time was probably reaching its peak, and a lot of that comes back to the idea that there do tend to be different types of founders in the world, different types of CEOs. And sometimes you get, sort of a crisis CEO or a growth stage CEO. And I'm really very strong as a founder creator CEO. So when I get to be close to customers, close to product, I'm building new things, I'm creating things, I'm watching people's eyes light up and get excited. That's where I love to play and where I love to be. And in every company, there's, I guess maybe one of the dirty secrets of success is that in the early stages of any company that you go and start, and I'm experiencing this again with DevStride now, you get to do all the fun things. You get to actually go in and build screens and go out and find, those enthusiastic early adopters, and you get to spend one-on-one time with all your customers and all those things that you really love. And as you become more and more successful, your job migrates from those things to things like cap table management and, long range financial planning and an HR policy.
Mm,
And there are people who are fabulous at all of those things, love all of those things. And if you're the sort of the product founder type, there's a point in time where all of that overtakes your schedule fully.
mhm,
And you may not find yourself enjoying your job as much. And that's kind of
mhm,
where I found myself. And so the board was pushing for more and more activities that were I was less and less interested in in overseeing. And so there just came a point where it was really a natural time for me to step out and to bring someone else in. And I think that was a good move for everybody. And I've been really happy since. And it was. I think that's the big thing is if you wake up in the morning, you're like, I don't want to do anything that
yeah,
my job involves. It's probably
yeah.
probably time to be done with that.
I've got this phrase that I think about a lot, which is uncomfortably competent, and
So
and about you ending up in a role that you're competent at, but you don't enjoy, and it
right.
becomes a really well paid prison quite a lot of the time.
It does. It does.
Yeah.
That it's another thing is that founding a new company, and those of listening to the podcast who are first time founders probably know this. Your seed stage capital partners will put salary limits on your income
Mhm.
as a leader and as a CEO. And my salary cap now in a startup is dramatically different than what my compensation package was at BriteCore after 16 years. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's the golden handcuffs thing is powerful.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I experienced that on a really micro level when I was employed, and I wanted to look at different parts of the value chain within the insurance industry, and I wanted to look at tech and change management, but I was really, really good on the search team running the sort of traditional insurance parts of the business, and every time I went for promotion or different team, and they were like, no, you're doing a great job. You just got to stay there, and I think that about employees as well. I think it's you got to be really careful with that balance between kind of comp and remuneration, having the kind of ability to sit there and say, do I enjoy this role? Now, I appreciate it's a luxury to be able to make those decisions,
It
but
is.
and mine's certainly not born out of being uber successful. It's just born out of the fact that I'm a guy without any children or responsibilities from that point of view. So it's a little bit easier for me. And I sort of turning to my friends
You
who've got
know,
three kids, going, "You should just quit." They're like,
yeah, right.
"No."
Yeah, not so much. So
uh,
I used to give every employee and will again in the future, now in my new venture, a whole speech when they would come to me and ask me for a big promotion because that happens regularly when you run a sizable company. People come and say,
mm,
well, I'm really looking for career advancement and all those things, and I would sit people
mm,
down and walk them through the journey of promoting up through a company. And frequently that next promotion represents a $20,000 bump in compensation, but maybe a doubling of your responsibility and stress. And
mm,
it's not always true that the next step in your career ladder is the best step. And and,
mhm.
and I think that that's something that we're kind of conditioned to believe all the time that maybe isn't really true.
Mm, mm. I was thinking when you were talking about it as well, there's a balance at the very early stage as well, and it depends if you've got a venture-backed business, you can get some people on board straight away. But like I'm for one that I run a very small company. The bits that cause me stress are the
Mhm.
bits that I really want to farm out as soon as
Yeah.
possible. As soon as I can find anyone competent to do half these things, then I will push them away because I want to stick to the core of what I do. But the core of what I do is the talking to people, meeting new clients. I love all of that. And
Right.
and and, and there's a point in which you're running a sort of early stage startup actually where you're doing a lot of things that you really don't want to do. And then I think you reach a point where you get rid of all those things. And then when you get the really big job, when the company reaches it, you come back to doing those bits
Yeah.
you don't want to do again. It's like a really weird virtuous
It's a weird
circle.
donut. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Somewhere in the early middle is where everything's really, really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally agreed. My first, so for a little bit of a funny story about that, at BriteCore, it had been, 16, 17 years since I
Mhm.
had looked at a bank statement myself and been responsible for it. And when we went to found DevStride, like order of operations number one, it's like, hey, what was the first thing I need to do to start this company? Well, I should probably, file for a business license, get a charter pulled together, get a bank account. Well, we don't have any revenue. We had no customers. And it turns out if you go to a commercial financial institution and say, I'd like to open a corporate account, and they say, what's your revenue? And you say $0, no one wants to give you a bank account. And I lost 3 weeks of my life trying to find a bank account. There's just this absurd thing where I'd gone from having tens of millions of dollars on my balance sheet to
Yeah.
I'm trying to get somebody to give me a bank account. And so
Wow.
it's a fascinating, just the scope and the scale difference in those things.
That's so funny. That's so funny. I mean, they talk about that, don't they? I mean, I say they objectively. It's like me. I talk about this all the time. And yeah, early stage founders, we predominantly work with early stage businesses, like anything from seed through to Series B.
Yeah.
And there's always this. This person needs to fit. They need to have startup, fit. And I think there's not enough objectivity put on that. What does that look like? Just because you've worked at a very big company doesn't mean you can't work at a very small company. In fact, it may be absolutely the thing you need to be successful. But is that something you think about? Is that because you know it yourself? Do you have people that are right for your early stage journey, but they're probably not right when you get to a certain size? You know that yourself. Is it something you're conscious of when you're sort of trying to hire people, put teams together?
I have strong opinions on this one.
Good.
So the larger an organization gets, by design and out of necessity, the more specialized the roles become. And that means that most people who have spent their careers in larger organizations are used to having a fairly narrow focus in their job, and they go very deep in some particular area. They probably have a lot of credentials and certifications and all those things. I am a project manager. That's my job. And I know everything about project management, but the moment you ask me to step out of that lane, I'm like, whoa, that's not my job.
Yeah.
And we actually experienced something similar at BriteCore, hiring out of the education sector, where people from education sort of have, and if you're like a college professor or something, you have sort of a different mentality around your scope. I think one of the biggest things you're looking for in a startup environment and in an early, seed to Series A stage environment is people who are comfortable wearing multiple hats and in fact thrive wearing multiple hats, because and those tend to be people whose attention span doesn't hold too long if you give them one repetitive task for a long time.
Sure.
And that's out of necessity, because when your team is 5 people or 10 people or even 20 people, everyone is juggling quite a few different priorities. And as the team grows, of course, you get more specialized, and then there's a tendency in the team to just transition to people who want to go deeper and be more focused. And early on, you want people who have more breadth and a lot of energy, and you're looking less for really, really extreme depth in any one area, and more a balanced sort of portfolio of skills. And I find that to be the case, and I know that probably the single biggest determining factor on success in both of the startups that I've run are just your willingness to get in and learn something new. There's no manual. No one's ever written this down before, because no one's ever thought about it before in this company. There's no playbook. There's no flow chart. You're going to go into a room and I'm going to give you an objective and you're going to figure it out. And then what you're going to give me back is the manual or the flow chart. And then the next person that we hire will have that. And that'll be a luxury for them. That'll be great. And so, some people love that, some people can't stand that. And I think that's a really good determining factor on whether you belong in a very large company or whether you belong in more of a startup environment.
I think my thing is I challenge everything. So unless I'm the person to write it the first time, that's why I'm happy in smaller businesses. I know that about myself. Yeah, I need to be the person writing that manual for the first time, because if I'm the person coming in down the line, I'm going, what idiot wrote this manual? So it's self-awareness is so important, I think.
Absolutely.
I love you've clearly got some strong views on culture and where you fit culturally. So I wanted to ask you about how do you manage culture as a business grows? When you go from that 16-year journey, how do you keep that culture going as it grows and scales, or can you? I suppose is the question. Do you realistically think you can?
The culture has to change. And I think that's something that a lot of founders fight, because they fall in love with the early culture, because the early culture in any company really is just a reflection of the founder's personality and values. And so the early team tends to imprint very heavily for companies that are successful, there tends to be a very enthusiastic, very charismatic leader somewhere in that sort of ecosystem. And the rest of the culture tends to imprint on that and really build up around that. And a lot of people will call that leading through a cult of personality. And I guilty as possible in that way. I find it very natural to lead through a cult of personality, and find a lot of people who I really get along with. They get along with me. We're going to go in a room. We're going to eat pizza. We're going to drink 4 or 5 beers and knock this out and get it done. And everybody's like happy and excited. As BriteCore grew, so BriteCore, by the time I exited my role as CEO, we were up to a little over 350 employees. So I watched the company go from, 3 or 4 employees to that like 10, and then, 50, and then 100 really changed things, and then 200 changed things, and then 350 really was different. And at every scale, I had to adjust and modify the way that I thought about the business, the way I thought about leading people, the way I thought about, policies and performance management and all of those things. And there are huge migrations that need to occur in your own thinking. And if you're not prepared to make them, it's a good signal that you should get out earlier. I also think that there's a lot of rewarding experiences that await if you are willing to grow with that team count and to evolve your thinking, because there is certainly a limitation on how much you're able to accomplish through a cult of personality, right? You can only really build maybe 150 tops, and I think for most people it's probably 30 or 40 impactful relationships in your life where the sort of people you can walk in a room and say, we just had an issue. It's 2 a.m. I need you to get up. Let's all hands on. Let's go get this thing done. And everyone's excited to go make it happen. You can manage a small team like that. You can't manage a large team like that. And so your scope of influence as a human being is going to be limited if you only ever learn to lead through a cult of personality, because you'll never be able to accomplish more than what a group of 20 or 30 people can accomplish. And so, I found it challenging to expand and to learn how to run larger teams and think more operationally, and how to set more formal goals and set up performance tracking mechanisms and all of those things. But I did find it rewarding to watch my team output larger and larger objectives and to tackle bigger and bigger problems, because it felt like we were making more of an impact in the world overall. And so I think there's a lot that's rewarding on both ends of that spectrum, but absolutely the culture will change from a cult of personality to something that is more objectively defined, intentionally defined through a management team and through a board as you grow. And I think there's beauty on both ends of that spectrum.
Yeah, because something that I was struck by when we're talking about cult personality businesses, and I don't disagree with anything you said there. I think that's absolutely true. And what I like about the recruitment industry, and I always end up bringing it back to this or InsurTech, because it's 2 things I know about, but they are cults of personality. They're usually almost a successful consultant or headhunter, and then they build around them, and they tend to be reflective of that person. But one thing that I'm really mindful of, hoping to build my own little cult, not just in recruitment, I want to move out to Arizona and have a ranch,
yeah,
have a ranch or something. But no,
the whole thing.
But the is being mindful of what impact that has on things like diversity and hiring diversely, because the challenge is you go, I want to have people that I want to chop up with over a pizza and a beer, and I completely agree with that point. And the danger is that you go, oh, I want people that think like me, and that's not reflective of any diversity specific metric, but there is a danger there, because you then go, I want people that are like me, and as businesses grow, you need definitely a decent proportion of people that don't think like you, and that's why you want them in the business. But it's a real balancing act, and that's why I suppose that's why those successful companies do outstrip that cult personality space. They get beyond that because they start to hire more pragmatically. But I do think maybe you do need that group think at that beginning, because it has to be important for those 30 people to get up at 2 a.m. and say, oh, we've got a problem, we're going to address it.
Well, I think there's I agree with everything you said there as well. The group think can take on different flavors, and in its sort of negative form, groupthink is everyone's afraid to combat, some loud person in the room. So whoever the most charismatic leader is in the room is going to rule the day and run the conversation because they're charismatic. And so we're group thinking, and no one else is really bringing any new opinions to the table, or maybe they can't because everyone thinks exactly alike in the first place. Although I think that tends to be less true, and tends to be more true that the loudest person in the room just carries the conversation.
Sure.
And so that's the downside to groupthink. On the positive side of it too, a different perspective on it is when you are running for your life early on, trying to get to revenue, sustainable headcount, sustainable product, all of those things. Too much conflict can be death, analysis paralysis, and it's more important that you get something done. Are you familiar with the any map will do analogy that?
No, please run me through it. But I had this conversation this morning about.
Yeah. So
sorry.
there's an interesting case study. For a while I did. It's something I'd recommend to everybody. I went and did a bunch of the MIT exec ed programs you can do while you're in your career, and you learn all kinds of things. I think HBS has things like that, and Carnegie Mellon does. There's a bunch of schools that offer it. And I went and did a round of those, and there was a case study that was particularly impactful to me, which was there was a story of a football team, soccer team, if you're in the U.S., that crashed in the mountains. I think there's a movie about this, and several people died, but like 18 people survived. And this one guy found a map in the wreckage and said, I think we can make it out of the mountains if we just follow this map and go this way. And harrowing journey ensues, and cutting to the end, everyone survives following this map. They get back to civilization. Turns out it's a map of the wrong mountain range, and but everyone lives. And the moral to the story, the lesson from the case study is any map will do sometimes, and it is frequently more important that you just keep moving than it is that we get the exact right answer. And so I think, the positive side of that equation is that if you get people who are all willing to maybe disagree early, but then commit and move, which could be mistaken for groupthink, but it's not, as long as you're having that healthy dialogue up front. But then you move. I think that's necessary for survival in a startup. Whereas then in a later stage company, when much more of your job is not wrecking the ship because someone built a ship and it's sailing along nicely and you don't want to wreck it, then there's much more of a role for sort of more confrontational sort of thinking, and that sort of like putting up antagonistic systems of control in order to make change hard on purpose because you have a system that's functioning well.
There was a recent study I read about building the highest tower, and there was 3 different groups. I think it was students, but it was definitely execs and children had to build the highest tower. Very limited materials. It was like sticks and twine sort of thing. And the children on average built the highest tower every time. And the point was that they would have they would continuously able to test and be creative, and they weren't emotionally invested in the ego so much. But the biggest thing that they would just jump on a decision and just go with it. They would just go, oh, let's just do that. Let's just try that. Oh, it's broken. Yeah. Okay, what we're gonna do now? Next idea, we'll build that. And Sophie, my marketing manager, and I this morning we're having this conversation, and I just said some things have just got to be good enough. And we'll come back to them and we'll perfect them. But and I do get that, because I think coming from a search background, search is all about finding the best of the best of the best for that role. And then I started working increasingly with earlier stage businesses, and it was like, oh, it's just not going to work in this environment. And that's not to say that we're looking for quality at all times, but we need the best within a time frame so we can move forward. We can't wait 6 months for the best talent, because we've got a 12-month runway. By that time a person starts spinning up their wheels, we've got 4 months for them to do anything. Not
particularly fair to the candidate to hire them with 4 months of runway left.
Exactly. So I think good enough is a huge adage to stick to. I wanted to ask you something. We had a really interesting conversation about about funding, and I've got loads of questions about funding, and I want to talk to you about what you've done recently and all of those good things. But what did you learn about fundraising that they don't teach you in the textbooks?
Oh my, so much
that you're happy to talk about on a podcast.
Yeah, no. Should this podcast be 12, 15 hours? Let's hear. Let's pull a few nuggets out. Number one, who you know tends to matter a lot more than the quality of your pitch deck and the quality of your idea. And I have found that to be true more than once now. And now you have to have a good idea. That doesn't mean you can walk into a room with a, idiocy on a napkin and raise money. You need to have something quality put together. But I've watched a lot of really brilliant founders and engineers go out and try to start companies, get nowhere because they didn't network appropriately. And, that's another one of those things that can have a positive and a negative side to it, right? You could call it, playing politics. And of course, all these things play into the larger conversation we're all having about systems of power and all those things. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the people who have the money want to give the money to people that they feel like they can trust. And we're all human beings, and we tend to trust people that we feel like we know. And you can't beat that. That's evolutionary in so many ways. And so there is, I think, something that is not taught a lot is very, very important, especially if you're in a founder sort of position and you plan to be raising money now in the future, you plan to found other companies in the future. You should be out there meeting and networking with capital partners every day of your life. If there's a day where you don't talk to a capital partner once, you might have squandered an opportunity there. And if there's a week that goes by, you've definitely squandered an opportunity. And so for a sense of what that looks like for me personally, at BriteCore, there was a 7-year window there between seed stage and Series A where we were not funding the company. I took a call from at least one capital partner every single week for 7 years. So by the end of that, I built a list, and I would circle back around. Some weeks I would take 2 or 3 calls. So by the time I went to do a Series A fundraise, I had over 400 capital firms in a spreadsheet that I had been maintaining an active, just here and there dialogue with, so that when it came time to actually raise funds, they felt like they knew who I was. They felt like they knew where I was heading. They knew what I had said I was going to do in the past relative to where I am now in the present. And I knew which one of those people had the right attitude, outlook, mentality, thesis, portfolio, fund stage, all of those things to what I was trying to accomplish. And that worked out really well for me. Similarly, then going into DevStride, which DevStride just is at the tail end of closing a seed stage. We actually just signed a term sheet last week, which I'm very excited about. So we have a lead investor, congrats. We have a bunch of follow-on investors. We're building a syndicate right now, so that's all happening for DevStride. Similarly, I both went back to some of that network, but also spent about a year building a new network of investors who are focused on seed stage capital. And I have traveled. I have been on 1,000 meetups. I am in Discord servers. I am all over the place trying to make sure that I know who everyone is, because relationship and networking tends to matter a lot more than anyone is going to tell you it does. And so one of the things that I think is really encouraging is, of course, obviously, I'm a 6 foot tall white man sitting here saying that, so that plays for me naturally. And in fact, now I'm a 6 foot tall white man with a successful exit in a previous company, so now I have money. So I like all the systems of power play in my favor. So that's an easy thing for me to say. I think something that I find very compelling and interesting, and something that I personally, with my own private wealth, I invest in a lot, is there are a lot of funds now that specifically go out and target underrepresented founders and underrepresented fund managers both. And so I have a big passion for that myself. It's something that I like to invest in. I invest through a network called First Close Partners, which is then run by Lowenstein Sandler, which is a fantastic legal firm in New York. And so it was true 15 years ago that if you were an underrepresented class of some sort, it could be very hard to break into the capital markets. Those barriers, it is still harder than it is for me, without any doubt, but those barriers are declining. And so I think for anybody who listens to this podcast who is like, I can't get anyone to call me back and talk to me, I would potentially be able to help you, connect you through to capital partners who would be willing to talk to you, if of course you have a good idea and not just garbage on a napkin. Which again, no one's going to invest in garbage on a napkin. So,
that's sometimes the problem. I speak to people that are going, "Oh, these people are idiots. It's just because they don't know. It's just because I'm not networked." And then you go, "Well, it might not just be that. Could just be a bad idea."
Right.
Maybe the next one is the one. Yeah.
Well, an idea. I'll tag onto that just a second. An idea is a lot more. I do run into this a lot too. A lot of people think an idea is I have a vision for this product or service that should exist in the future, and that's my idea. That's not an idea. Everyone in the world has those. Like every morning, every person is taking a shower and it's like, what would be cool? And they come up with some great idea. That's not an idea that anyone cares about. What people care about when they say, do you have an idea? What they mean is, do you have a comprehensive, cohesive product, service, go-to-market, funding, scaling? All those things are part of a comprehensive idea. It's not just, I think it would be cool if there was, Facebook, but for plumbers. That's not what they mean. They mean a cohesive plan. And so an idea is much larger, I think, than what a lot of people recognize as well.
That's so true. I mean, the amount of, you're a very successful entrepreneur. You'll have friends that aren't in that world, and you must have. I've got this idea, and you just go, well, go and do it. Go and do it.
Great, go for it.
Because you've got to get it started, and then someone will give you some money and show interest, but you've got to just do it.
My favorite one is when people are like, oh, I thought of that first when some company is successful. And I'm like, did you now? Did you? You and every other person alive always knew that, it would be great if I could pick up my mobile phone and hit a button and a car would show up. But you got to hand it to Uber and to Lyft and the people who actually went out and made it happen. It's the execution that's hard. It's not coming up with wouldn't it be great if this existed in the world?
Yeah. I do remember painfully. I saw it was a 24-hour turnaround laundry service. It was like all app driven, and they would come pick it up from the desk. And I saw it was a thing in the States. It was operating in, I think it's probably operating in San Francisco at the time. This is obviously when everyone worked in office or suits. And I was desperately trying to register Laundrap as a name, and I was like going to town. I'd gone out for funding, and then I think it was one of the Uber execs had left to launch exactly that in London, Laundrap. But
he might win.
Yeah, that was the only one where I was going around. I was like, that was my idea. But yeah, now we're not working in offices. It's probably dying a horrible death. So I'm not happy about that. But I'm happy I'm not running it.
If I'm not mistaken, you and I are both in t-shirts right now.
yeah, exactly. Working from home, and and we were talking about the fact that I probably don't wash t-shirts as much as I should do these days because I never see anyone in public. The other thing I wanted to ask you about as well, and this is just an advice session for new founders, so I apologize for utilizing you that way, Phil.
Absolutely.
What's the best piece of advice you would give a founder that isn't about funding? What's this kind of nugget? Let's say that person who's got an idea, but they've got a proper idea and they've gone all the way through. Maybe it's something that surprised you in your journey.
I'll say something that may be a bit contrarian to a lot of what you hear normally, and so you can let this be in the comment section. Everyone can rage back and forth about this one.
Yeah.
You hear a lot about setting like a 100x goal, and that you have to set your goals really, really, really high, and if you're going to achieve extraordinary outcomes. I personally think that's a bunch of crap, and I think that is wrong. And here's why. I've gone through seasons of my career where I tried to set the bar insanely high, thinking that even if we miss this insanely high bar, at least everyone was striving for their very best and whatever. And what I've really found is that it does a couple of things. Number one, it crushes your team because no one can ever make you happy. No one can ever meet the goal. Who wants to be in any environment where no matter how hard I work, I'm never going to achieve the objective? That's a miserable working environment. Number two, it makes you sound like an idiot to people in the know who understand what it really takes to get from point A to point B. And if you come in and show someone, for example, a pitch deck where you're going to do like a B2B service offering, and you're showing that you're going to pick up 1,000 businesses in your first year of operations with $1 million budget, like you're wrong. You're not going to do that, and no one's going to do that. And so it can detract from your credibility. It can demoralize your team. And so one of the best pieces of advice I've been given, and that I give other people frequently, is set your targets aggressive. Don't make them easy. Easy's wrong, but like 15% higher than where you think you're likely to land, so that everyone is stretching some, but they are stretching within reason. And that will force you then, it does something really meaningful on the backside as a founder. It forces you to directionally plan more for what you have instead of what you hope to have, everything going perfectly, pie in the sky, best possible outcome. We're going to go do all these things. Founders have a tendency to get whipped up about those things. And then the issue with that is you'll have a tendency to talk about that in front of customers and investors and key staff. And you start setting an expectation that then if the expectation doesn't get met, everyone feels let down. And the difference between feeling let down and feeling enthusiastic is simply what expectation you set up front. And so I really think that, and I give this advice all the time because I do a lot of advising. I get hit up by a lot of early startups and asked to come in and advise. And so I run into a lot of founders who show me sort of pro formas that are clearly, 500, 1,000% more aggressive than they should be. And, and they've got 10 months of runway and they're going to raise another, for 5X, in 6 months. I'm like, no, you're not. And that's why companies fail at such a high rate, because people are planning for it's almost like gambling. It's much more like going to the casino than it is like running a business. And I think running a business is much more about thinking about what resources you do have. If you don't have a resource, instead of hoping for it to be there and setting some wildly ambitious goal, I think instead you build a plan, a very meaningful action plan to go out and acquire the resource that you need and plan for what you have instead of what you hope you will have if everything goes perfectly in the future.
Yeah, and I think that's very timely advice. We've seen a bit of a restriction on the markets and on the investments, particularly at those earlier stages, and we're seeing businesses struggle. And that, look, that's no criticism. You're operating in a certain environment where you can go from round to round to round. But when that rug's pulled away, it is interesting how quickly and sharply that's had to reset. And I've had a few sort of painful conversations lately around, someone said, oh, they've gone for profitability really early. And we're sort of joking about it, going, oh, how old fashioned,
right. How quaint.
Yeah. Oh, really? The profitability. Good business fundamentals. I always, it's such a sharp memory of mine is the other way of we started a new team at some business I worked at, and they did 467% of targets, and everyone was popping champagne. I just like lonely hand at the back went, doesn't that mean your targets just wildly inappropriate for the opportunity? This isn't
you didn't understand your market at all.
Yeah, like no one should never do 467% of target. That just means your target is terrible. But no, you're right. But it was funny as you were talking, I felt sort of slightly admonished, even though you weren't doing it with me, because I'd set myself a target doing 300% of what we did last year. And I think we'll track to do like 50 to 100, which will be incredible.
Right, exactly.
But why did you put that? It would have been amazing to do 50%. Now we're going 300, and then halfway through the year you have to reset and go, oh, that's not going to happen. And it's just a sort of stick to hit yourself with and your team, I think.
Exactly. It's all a question of your own psychology, and of course a lot of that has to do with how long do you plan to stay in it. And obviously 16 years at my last company, I tend to be a founder who has a long range vision, and I like to endure. And the 300-500% growth target thing, it's not that it can't happen. It does happen. Some companies pull it off, and that's great. And if you have reason to believe you can, it's absolutely reasonable to set your target there. But again, with what you have, the resources you have, like, this is a real objective we can actually go hit. The problem is if you set that objective and it's this giant stretch goal, and you do that year over year, you're running a sprint, not a marathon. And maybe that's your goal. And if that's your goal is to come in, be in and out in 18 months in some venture, then sure, go for that, strategy. I tend to want to be here a decade from now and, doing what I'm doing, but seeing it be wildly, predictably more successful. And so, and what I found is that in the funding process for DevStride, a lot of what helped me raise money, because I did just secure a seed lead investor during the downturn. And a lot of people that I know are like, how did you do that? No one has access to capital. And I'm like, actually, I have access to a lot of capital, but it's because I don't walk into a room and show people hockey sticks that make no sense. And, I walk in and show them very thoughtful plans where there's a go-to-market strategy behind it. There's a hiring plan behind it. There's a CAC to LTV ratio that is improving over time. My unit economics are improving, and they're incremental steps that you can justify at every stage. And that builds confidence and it builds enthusiasm for people because it feels like, hey, we can make this happen. Another thing, sorry, I know I'm going to chase a rabbit for one second. You popped on something that I think is actually a really interesting discussion point too, that we can chase or not. About going for profitability early and that being quaint, and obviously, as you can imagine, with the long-term vision, I'm a fan of profitability. I also think though that there is a divergence in profitability and how you think about profitability that is sometimes underappreciated by early founders. Because if you don't have a financial background, I did not going into running BriteCore, because BriteCore was a system of record for insurance companies and did all their accounting. I got a healthy dose of financial education over the years. And I don't know if I consider myself a financial expert, but I understand balance sheets and I understand all the different systems of accounting pretty well now. And I think it's really, really important to keep an eye on the difference between your cost of goods sold versus your operating expense. And, it's one thing to operate unprofitably because your COGS is well within the range of your revenue, right? And you can continue your operations indefinitely on your revenue, and you are choosing to, raise additional capital, take surplus profit, all those things, and plow them back into, operating expense and growth activities. And that's a great thing to do. And in that way, you could say that a business is profitable as long as it is a strategic choice to continue to make these growth plays. Where you get into trouble is when you have to make the growth play, because there's a thing that happens in a lot of balance sheets where people push things because they want their cost of goods sold to reflect lower, because these are all looking for a gross profit margin that's really healthy. And so they take a bunch of things that are really, truly a cost of goods sold, like we have to do this to stay in business, and they push them down lower in the balance sheet where they show up in OpEx. And then you get this like distorted picture of whether or not business really is sustainable or not. And to me, the number that really matters is, does my revenue support my true cost of goods sold, my true cost of operations, all things in, no messing with the numbers to juice my metrics, to juice my margins, like all in every single activity and tool and resource it would take to keep the lights on. And if at that point my revenue is positive, then actually you're fine. It's fine to be be negative on cash flow, because it's a choice. Then it's not a necessity.
Something that I think that's a really important point. It's something we've touched on a few times on the pod, was just that people have gone out with I worry, particularly in the insurtech space, and you can have a very discrete solution which has massive value to the industry, but your USP is in that discrete solution, whether that be a product or service, right, or a specific digital MGA, for example. But then you go and you get success, you get momentum, and then you raise arguably more than you need. And I think some people raise these sort of huge valuations, and you can drown under the weight of the capital that you've taken on board, because actually the USP is built around this discrete solution which doesn't scale. And then you have to go and compete into areas of the business where you don't have a unique proposition, where you don't have a unique advantage, right, and then you've watered down what you do. So I think taking on the right funding partners, taking on the right funding amount is an undervalued skill, because it's very tempting to go, raise more than what you need, sit on it. But as we know, cash in the bank is, you need to spend it. Otherwise, why has anyone ventured you with it? And then you're in a difficult situation. So but that's a cultural thing, and that is a learned thing as well. I sit and
Agreed.
talk about venture-backed business. I wouldn't know what it's like. I've bootstrapped everything I've ever done. The idea of taking on venture money to me is terrifying.
Well,
But
it is terrifying. Having done it
yeah,
both ways, having bootstrapped for a while and then taking capital, it
yeah,
definitely changes everything about your
mm,
business. And you do have to be mindful of your capital partner, their responsibility back to their LPs and their fund. And so, I
sure,
think for a lot of founders, the check that gets written by a VC is like magic money. It's
yeah,
like, oh, I don't
yeah,
ever think about where that comes from.
yeah,
So I myself, again, I'm an LP in a fund of funds, and so I sit on the other side of the table. I've been at all points in the table. I'm now an early startup founder. Well, I'm also an LP in a fairly sizable fund of funds.
hmm,
I'm an advisor in a lot of mid-stage companies. I run a fairly, a post-Series B company.
hmm,
I've been at all those different stages, and I have an appreciation for how the funding mechanism itself works. And I think a lot of founders don't understand where is that money coming from and what is the responsibility the VC has back to the LPs in their fund to show a profit, to return capital to them within a given window of time when the fund matures and all of that.
hmm,
And it's really important that you understand all of those things, because if you don't understand what your VC is responsible for in terms of their own responsibilities back to their LPs, you're going to find yourself all the time in a conflict with the VC, because your goals for your business are not the same as their goals for their LPs of their fund. And you
mm,
have to understand how those two things overlay.
It's like trying to sell to a customer without knowing what the customer's true
Yeah,
objectives of your
right.
product or service are.
Right. What are they really trying
Um,
to accomplish?
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, I'm really conscious of time, but one last thing I did want to talk to you about is obviously talk a little bit more about DevStride and why now. I think we've just established that you can't sit still, and and enjoy it too much. But where did DevStride come from as an idea? It sounds like it was born out of kind of challenges that you met at BriteCore, and obviously you've just got your first seed investor. Where are you at with the company? Who's in it? Give us a picture.
Yeah, I really appreciate you asking. So at BriteCore, we were responsible for both a massive code base, 3.5 million lines of source code, as well as we went through multiple generational upgrades of that source code. So that it was a massive ongoing, stream of programs, if you think about like project and portfolio management. And then we were also responsible for going in and implementing BriteCore at these big insurance companies. And a large insurance implementation can involve hundreds of people for multiple years. So very
Mm,
complex value streams, complex project delivery. And so I had, over the course of the years that I did that, I had an opportunity to use, I think, just about every product, program, and portfolio management tool out there,
mhm,
and interfaced with all of them and found them to be very lacking on some key fronts. And so I was always frustrated by that when my board would come to me and say, hey, we just gave you $60 million and we want you to invest it in X, Y, and Z, and tell us where everything's at and what's the ROI we're getting on all of this. And that was actually very, very hard to come up with that data. And I had to sort of derive it from this huge variety of sources. And so have a central thesis that the world would be better for most agile development teams if their data model across all of their tools was unified. And so DevStride is, a lot of people think about it like a Jira sort of product, but it's much more than that. It's
mhm,
actually doing strategic portfolio management, which is a step above project management. And what it does that's really kind of unique is that it lets you map out the strategic value streams of your business from top to bottom in sort of a big mind map. And then you house work in your value streams. And then you
mm,
take work out of the value streams and you assign them then to teams and projects and sprints and all the things that everyone's used to doing. We've integrated time tracking and capacity planning and all the other data elements that are necessary so that I actually could just ultimately scratch my own itch at BriteCore, which is what's going on? How much have we spent on X, Y, or Z? And, and there's a whole series of chain on those things. What do we spend in, services? And then what do we spend on the implementation for this one customer? And then this one initiative for this one customer, and these 3 projects that make up that initiative. And so wanted to build a tool that really mapped out the strategic value chain all the way at the executive level, all the way down to the contributor level. And then, of course, all the engineers that are working with me and all the folks in our product advisory group have a long list of things they dislike about all their day-to-day tooling. And so we've been trying to address usability and workflow and speed and all of those things for your daily contributors so that we have this great set of tools on the front lines that then ultimately all report back to a unified data model so executives can get one easy roll-up view of, what the hell's going on inside of my company and where's my money going.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're doing with DevStride, and we've had fabulous success so far. I'm at that kind of early phase now where we did an angel round a year ago, and got the product to MVP status and where it's ready to go to market. Have about 25 organizations using it on a trial basis, and like I think any good product CEO, I have an open Slack channel with all of them, and it's just like, tell me every single day everything you hate about my product so I can keep fixing it and keep making it better and better and better. And we're actually just at the point where we're ready to launch and go to market. So that'll be happening in the next 60 to 90 days where we'll actually sign up for subscriptions and the whole thing.
Wow.
And and we just closed our seed round. And so really excited to take off with it. And hopefully we'll bring a really significant revolution to all of these sort of enterprise SaaS agile teams out there trying to track all these parallel value streams. And I think we've built something really compelling to make that much more direct, much easier, much more streamlined than it is with current tools like Jira and Rike.
Yeah, super exciting. I mean, it's such an obvious need, and that's that. I said this yesterday to someone that came on the podcast, and I was like, I think when something's really simple to explain and understand, then you're onto something. And I've mentioned this before, but I've got a background in stand-up comedy. It's like the observational comedy that someone points out, and someone described, Michael McIntyre's a famous comic in the UK, and he had this thing about the drawer in the kitchen, which is just full of like batteries and rubbish, and everyone has one, and everyone talks about it being middle of the road, and I'm like, yeah, but it's a brilliant observation. Like, and because it stares you in the face, and I think I hate using a comedy analogy because that doesn't seem to track. But I think all the best ideas are they stare you in the face, and you go, oh yeah, we need that. Yeah.
Oh right, right. This should exist probably.
Yeah. This should exist. Why doesn't it exist? Surely someone's made it, and I'm really pleased someone does. Phil, I'm really conscious of our time, so I'm going to call it there because I could talk to you all day. I think we did about an hour and a half first time we spoke. So I really, really appreciate you coming on and appreciate you sharing all of those insights, because we've got so many, particularly first time founders, people going through that journey, and they haven't. It's nice to talk to someone that survived, got out the other side. So
for sure,
and clearly not so burnt, it doesn't want to do it again as well. So I really, really appreciate your time, because I know you're a busy guy. So thank you so much for being a guest.
Thank you so much for having me on. And I'd be happy to visit with anybody who has questions and is just trying to figure it all out, because I have a big soft spot for the first time founder journey, having been through it myself. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
No, awesome. Thanks, Phil. Take care. I'll speak to you soon. All the best.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.